thank you for joining us for this, our fourth brown bag session. These things have been tremendous. We've talked to political reporters from around the state, thought leaders that make a difference in this upcoming election cycle, and we would be remiss if we did not have our guest today with us, and that's Brian Howey. Brian has been the publisher of the Howey Political Report, which is one of the most preeminent publications in our state, something that we all learn to read if you're going to learn what really goes on in Indiana politics. He's done that for 22 years. Prior to that, he worked for the Elkhart Truth as not only a political reporter, but also the state editor. And he also is a guy that you probably see on MSNBC from time to time talking about Indiana, and also is the Howey Political Report in conjunction with WTHR that puts out statewide polls that garner quite a bit of attention. So Brian, thank you for being with us.
Well, thanks for calling me a thought leader. I like that.
That's good. Well, you are a thought leader.
Might have surprised somebody in my fifth grade class.
Well, to keep being a thought leader, I don't keep them surprised.
Yeah.
Give us your background real quick. I did the opening, but tell us a little bit more about your background.
I'm an Eagle Scout. I've lived in just about every congressional district, I think, except maybe the 4th. I'm a Vincennes University guy. I was there a little bit after John Gregg, and then graduated from IU the same year that Evan Bayh and Joe Hogsett did, 1978. And I work out of Indianapolis. I've got a cabin down in Brown County, so I'm down in Nashville quite a bit. But that helps me kind of stay grounded. I've got a foot in the capital here, but I'm also out with regular Hoosiers, out in the rural areas, talking to them and everything. So I think it better serves me not to just be part of the state house culture, but to actually be, floating around the state.
Well, you don't suffer from limestone radiation. If you're in Brown County, you get a chance to get around and see signs. So when people say, what's going on in the state, you can say, well, I'm driving down 135 or I'm driving down and I see lots of signs along there. So this cycle, what have you noticed? I mean, the Trump phenomenon in the primary, Hillary Clinton obviously and Bernie Sanders. Sanders wins the state. What do you attribute the Trump rise of his campaign to?
Well, one thing I want to really underscore here is we are the center of the political universe. And we had, a presidential primary. We haven't had many of those that mattered, obviously, 1968, 2008, and then this one was right up there. Both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump won their party primaries with 53% of the vote. And they're fueling off, I think, the same anger, distrust, with people who see a rapidly changing world. They're afraid they're getting left behind, and but they're being fueled, from polar opposites of the spectrum. Sanders obviously from the left, and Trump from the right, and maybe the right center a little bit. So that's been fascinating. And then the whole reshuffling of the State House deck, where Sue Ellspermann's out, Eric Holcomb's in. Then we have Governor Pence going nationwide. Holcomb comes out of nowhere. Evan comes back out of nowhere. The tickets are reshuffled in late July and early August. This has really been an extraordinarily strange, bizarre, and wonderful political cycle.
Strange, bizarre, and wonderful?
I love it. I'm having a great time.
So, knowing that, if it's strange, bizarre, and wonderful, let's pick up on that
all
theme.
All at once, yes.
Okay. What happens November 8th, since it's strange, bizarre, and wonderful? Wonderful, of course, would be for a particular party to win on November 8th. But strange, bizarre, and wonderful, what would that be?
I don't know. That's the thing. I've been one of my finishing lines for a number of columns and a lot of my Howey Politics analysis is anything can happen. And just this past 2 weeks, just about anything has happened. I mean, here we've got the Republican presidential nominee having a Twitter war with a Latino beauty queen. I mean, who would have come up with that one? Right. We had the debate, which Alicia Mikado kind of came out of nowhere. Then we had the lewd audio tape in which we've had to watch Governor Pence try to defend Donald Trump in locker room banner when he was 60 years old. Now people have been asking me, you've used the P word and that kind of thing, and it's like, yeah, maybe back in junior high, maybe at a poker game, but not so much lately.
Right.
Not so much lately. So there's a maturity factor here. And having said all that, I've had numerous conversations with Trump supporters. There's just no talking them out of it. They want to bust up the system. They want to send a message to Washington, and they will take anything he says, not necessarily hook, line, and sinker, but I've been calling this the post-truth election. I think it befits my background. There was, when you wrote for the Elkhart Truth, there was an extra burden there. You don't want to get caught in a lie. This election, people don't care about the truth. They are.
Now you're saying people or the candidates don't care?
Well, both. I think there's so many individuals out there that a lot of Trump supporters will say, for instance, well, Hillary's a big liar, and yet you go to PolitiFact and you compare the number of false and pants on fire and Pinocchio statements. Trump is way ahead of Hillary in that count, but they don't care. And so, and then on top of all that, we have two historically unpopular presidential nominees. I mean, Trump's unfavorables in Indiana are in like 57%. Hillary's are even higher; they're 62%. And this is just going to be a powder keg of political dynamite. And so, when you ask me what's going to happen, I really don't know.
Well, now you kind of told us, you gave us a little bit of a chart. You did some polling.
Yes.
So let's revisit that poll. Some of the numbers, maybe some of you are not aware of it, but it was good enough to be breaking news within campaigns to tell you how important it was. What numbers did you have for president, and what numbers for U.S. Senate, and numbers for governor?
Well, Howey Politics Indiana and WTHR, we are the only independent media sources doing polling in Indiana this cycle. So it really behooves you to tune in to howeypolitics.com. We've got two barn burners in the governor's race. John Gregg had a 2-point lead over Eric Holcomb, and I think a lot of that is a function of party loyalty. I think a lot of Republicans, even though they don't know a lot about Eric Holcomb, they really don't know who he is, they're gravitating toward him. Senate race, we had Evan Bayh up by 1%, I think 42-41% over Todd Young. And the fascinating thing about that poll is when Evan was running for governor and senator back in the 80s and 90s, he would routinely get about, what you told me, about 25% of the Republican vote. In our polls, he's getting about 11%. That's a huge change. And then the presidential race, we had it somewhat tighter than what we thought. The first poll we did in September, I think Trump was up 8%. This poll, he was up 5%. You think that maybe he has a little bit higher lead simply because the Trump voter is going to turn out. I think the key question there is, what do the Sanders voters do and everything? We believe that the gubernatorial and the presidential races are kind of on a parallel track. Our pollster Gene Ohm from Public Opinion Strategies, who's been polling in Indiana since 1996 with the Indiana Realtors, he thinks that whoever wins the presidential race will probably pull in the governor with them. And that's why this whole beauty queen thing, and then the sex banter with Billy Bush, we're going to be obviously watching to see if that has any impact. The Senate race is kind of a little bit out there on its own, running on a different dynamic. Our pollster seems to think that people are equating Evan Bayh because of the brand that goes way back to the 1960s. Evan is perceived as more of a incumbent institutional force, and he also surfaced out of nowhere with his $10 million war chest. That's why I've been calling him the $10 million man. Out of nowhere in July, and that kind of feeds into part of the Trump-Sanders line that the system's rigged. That the guy, he didn't file for the primary. He didn't go before the voters in the primary. He surfaces out of nowhere, pushes Barron Hill out of the race, and maybe deservedly so. Barron wasn't raising a lot of money. And here he is with his $10 million. And initially, with about a 20 point lead, we now have that race much tighter. Evans people tried to diss our poll a little bit, and as my response to that is, I'm not in the propaganda business. My subscribers want reliable data sets, and they also want accurate forecasts. So that's where we're at. So we've got 3 very different races, and then we're watching peripherally the 2nd Congressional District where Lynn Coleman is taking on Jackie Walorski, and then down in the 9th we have Shelley Yoder, the Monroe County Councilwoman, taking on Tennessee Trey Hollingsworth, the Republican, who has quite a fat checkbook.
Well, first off, so that I'm not playing the role of Billy Bush here, my job is to make sure that our program reflects the nonpartisan nature of what we're doing. Brian's opinions are those of Brian's, but I want to move to some other questions. One, are you going to do another poll?
Yes, we'll be in the field probably in the last week. I'm not sure, we don't have the dates set. I'm not sure if it's going to be a week out or maybe a couple days out. That's something that I've got to work out with the 13 folks here. But yes, we will have a fascinating final poll. That'll be our fourth poll of this cycle, and who knows what we're going to see in that one, except that we've seen numbers change, and so this is a very dynamic circumstance right now.
We're going to move off polling, but before we do that, I want to point out that in 2012, Brian Howey did a poll for Superintendent of Public Instruction. At that point, Glenda Ritz was basically an unknown candidate running against Tony Bennett with a lot of money. And the poll came back and showed Glenda Ritz, I believe, within like 4 or 5 points of Tony Bennett. Set the world on fire. So for anybody watching this, don't discount the kind of things that come from Brian's polls, and really get ready to tune in for what will be the final poll that will come out from Howey Political Report in Channel 13. Brian, let's talk about a couple other things. Indiana's just overall climate. I know that you do other polls, other things besides just political. What issues are to the forefront? I mean, when we get away from locker room banter, did you lie, emails, am I redemptive, all those things. When we get away from that, what are some of the issues that people are talking about via your polling and that you think resonate at the kitchen table?
Well, I think I know the 2 big issues are the economy and national security, terrorism. And one thing nationally, I mean, if we get another terror attack at San Bernardino or in Orlando or something like that, that could really change things here in the final month. And then peripherally, you've got other issues, the LGBT civil rights expansion, that's kind of down the list, cybersecurity, that kind of thing. But I think people are going to vote their pocketbooks on this one. The perception is that Main Street in Indiana hasn't done as well since 2008, 2009 as Wall Street has. Our pollster summed it up after our April poll when we got some surprising numbers. The evangelical voter, for instance, you would have thought that they would have been in Ted Cruz's camp in the primary, and they weren't. There was a lot of them that were with the profane and vulgar Donald Trump, who has James Dobson described him as a baby Christian, and the guy has flipped on just about every issue. But there they were, the evangelical voter here in Indiana, they're voting their pocketbook. Gene put it this way, he said, they're asking a question, which is, why is my adult child still living in my basement? Okay, I think that may be one of the best quotes, and so that's why we're seeing just some different voter activity, perception, and participation than we've seen in any other cycle.
You put together this publication now for 22 years.
Yes.
So what's the chronology of that? When do you put it to bed? When do you start working on it? That's a lot of work.
Yeah, well, first of all, Howey Politics Indiana began as Howey Political Report back in 1994. And that was a wave election. The Republicans took back the Congress, I think, for the first time in 50 years and everything. And then what I do is I have a great source network. I have a lot of contributing writers from Craig Dunn, the Howard County Republican Chairman, to Shaw Friedman up there in LaPorte, and some great long-standing voices, Rich James, who's with the Times of Northwest Indiana, and Jack Colwell, the Dean of Indiana Journalists up in South Bend. They're contributors. I've got a lot of voices that come across the spectrum. I do 4 daily wires, kind of a compendium or compilation of news from across the state, out of the congressional offices, out of the State House, and then I do my weekly report on Thursday, and that's truly my passion. That's what I love to do. I like doing the analysis, grabbing information, trying to make sense of it all, and giving my readers reliable insights and forecasts. And then I also have a statewide newspaper column, runs in about 35 newspapers, as well as Channel 13. I reach about 500,000 readers every week. Not all of them read it, but a lot of them do.
No, but it's out there.
Yeah.
Just as this program is out there for you to tune in anytime that you want to, our program has been very, very successful. Thanks to you tuning in and looking at it, views both live and later on. We've been very, very fortunate in our embryonic stages. Brian, I appreciate you being with us. You would be remiss if you didn't check out the Howey Politics Indiana, and you'd be remiss if you didn't pay attention to the polling before this election's over. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day.